and I'm here with one of our expert contributors, Chris Matthews, the president of Bellwether Research, and we're going to talk a little bit about gender and campaign strategy, specifically the attention recently to how women candidates this cycle are using gender in their campaign advertisements. So there have been at least 2 ads of women running for governor where they feature in some way themselves breastfeeding.
Right.
So sort of what's your initial reaction to that? And also specifically, do you think it's effective?
Right. So I want to qualify the fact that my opinion about whether or not you use breastfeeding in ads is unrelated to my feelings about breastfeeding. So my reaction to using breastfeeding in ads, though, was why is it in there? So if you view campaign ads as a job interview or a presentation, what are you saying by breastfeeding your child there? And I'm not really sure how the breastfeeding relates to any kind of policy that you're going to advocate or be uniquely qualified to address.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting because it may be, when you're seeing this reaction among sort of Democratic women or young women who are mothers, there's a sort of implicit assumption that that translates to policy, right? So that they may think, well, okay, if she's breastfeeding, she shares something that's a reality of mine, and therefore when she looks at policy, she might see it in a similar way as me, right? So that empathetic piece might work even with some of that policy stuff, but they're not actually saying this is how it translates into policy.
So, but couldn't you also communicate that by just picking up your child or, showing a family photo? Like, voters are smart enough to see, oh, she's a mom of toddlers, or she's a mom of a baby, or mom of teenagers, and then make sort of the leap to what she understands about life and policy.
All right, so breastfeeding, I think, is an extreme case.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a case that gets a lot of attention. I can't imagine that wasn't part of the motivation to do some of these ads. You get some national attention because we've never seen it before.
Right.
But some other ads we're seeing this cycle are also using gender or particularly sort of women's unique experiences in their advertisements, in their messaging, and particularly some of those experiences around sexual harassment or sexual abuse. Do you look at those in the same way in terms?
Yeah, I see. So I have a different reaction to the breastfeeding ads than I do to the candidates who've talked in a personal way about sexual harassment, because sexual harassment is a problem, and it in some cases it needs a policy solution. It's so to talk about a personal experience with sexual harassment, I view as different. It talks about having direct experience with a problem many women are facing and which we haven't adequately addressed. So
right.
I think that can actually be really effective. And there are ways to talk about sexual harassment that aren't like, we hate all men.
Right.
All men are bad. That would not be a good treatment of it, but to talk about it in a way of, this has been my personal experience, I think can be really quite effective.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that one of my reactions to these ads is that it is a space in which women can say, I bring something unique and different. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's a negative experience like that, right? I've had direct experience with this negative thing that so many women deal with. And so I'm going to know better, perhaps, or bring something distinct to the conversation, the policy conversation that we're going to have about sexual harassment.
Right.
Because my male colleagues probably haven't experienced it in the same way. I also think this gets to a question about, are we moving forward in campaigns to a degree that we aren't asking women to sort of meet the expectations or the status quo that's been there, which has largely been set by men. And so in the past, I feel like what we've done often with women candidates is say, you just have to meet that expectation.
Right.
We got to prove you're tough, we got to prove you're strong. And so a lot of your life as a woman or a lot of your distinct experiences, like, let's not make a big deal of those because we want you to fit the molds.
Yeah.
Whereas this time it's kind of like, actually, I present something different and maybe that is why you should vote for me.
That's so interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you know as well as I do that the research is out there, especially for executive office, like governor, that you've still got to be either tough or strong. Strong being something a little more accessible to women than tough, right? Yeah. You have to be seen as a leader and decisive. And then in other studies, when voters are asked to picture a leader or picture, an executive, and you have men and women's faces, even when the woman is in a suit and the man's in a suit, they picture the man.
Yeah.
So I think that's still in the water. I don't think that has changed.
Right.
But The thing that's, I think, unique about this election cycle is that we're looking, that there's such unhappiness with the status quo that change might move itself up in terms of priorities.
Yeah.
Up there with tough and strong and,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
change. And there is, quite frankly, a reaction to some of the extreme masculinity that seems to be defining,
Yes.
this era right now.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a higher value placed on feminine characteristics more so, but we're not going to know really how this ultimately plays out until it plays out, right? Yeah.
So this is the big scope question, right? So part of this conversation we're having is about, does it work in this cycle? Will it persuade voters? Part of my own research is looking at, well, to what degree do campaigns actually change voters' minds, not about voting, but about all of those expectations that you're talking about? And so part of the argument that I make that is tough to make to practitioners is there's a long-term investment here. And so disrupting these expectations so that you actually associate some of these different traits or different areas of expertise with what we value in an office holder, that actually in and of itself is a positive or could be a positive effect of a campaign, even if you don't win.
Right. So that's like a pretty tough sell, right? To a candidate or a practitioner, like, hey, why don't you take one here for the team and advance our culture and shift our norms and so I'm not really looking at that. I'm looking at, the effectiveness of a candidate in this election cycle with the goal of winning an election. My focus is really just on the immediate impact, the electoral consequences.